The air above Thalassara's northern archipelago shimmered with tension, as if the auroras themselves were holding their breath. Floating platforms hovered over the deep blue ocean, tethered to the cliffs by magnetic anchors and energy pylons. On the largest of these platforms, the funeral assembly had gathered. Humans in dark ceremonial uniforms moved with quiet precision, their faces etched with grief but hardened by the unspoken fear that the fragile interstellar truce was only a heartbeat away from shattering. Dragon emissaries perched on the edges of the cliffs, their scales catching the faint sunlight, gleaming like molten metals, wings folded neatly against their sides but bodies taut, every movement measured. Kalen Voss stood at the edge of the human contingent, the crisp wind tugging at his cloak. He had trained for moments like this, in simulations and diplomatic exercises, yet nothing in all those years of preparation had captured the strange weight of seeing both human and dragon leaders gathered for a single purpose, mourning. His mentor, Lyra Voss, had spent decades weaving the delicate threads that kept dragons and humans from tearing each other apart. And now she lay silent, her coffin suspended above the water by an anti-gravity field, floating like a solemn jewel against the endless horizon. He scanned the faces around him. Ambassador Selena Corvain stood rigid, jaw tight, eyes scanning the cliffs for any sign of sudden movement, as though the slightest flutter of wings could be a prelude to war. Beside her, aides whispered in hushed tones, fingers hovering near communication devices that could summon orbital defense units in seconds. Beyond the cliffs, the ocean rippled as if sensing the unease, waves reflecting the fractured sunlight in jagged patterns. On the cliffs above, Elder Dragon Counselor Irinder observed with the detached vigilance of centuries of experience. His copper scales seemed almost dull compared to the younger dragons, but his eyes burned with a cold intensity. Every human gesture, every movement of a ceremonial banner, every sound carried meaning, he catalogued them all. The dragons had lived long enough to remember the wars that had nearly annihilated both species. They remembered the treaties that had been broken in moments of fear. He could feel the tension in the air like a physical weight, a bridge stretched thin over a chasm. Kalen shifted slightly, trying to ignore the chill that swept over the platform. He remembered Lyra's words in her last council meeting, spoken softly but with fierce clarity, "Peace is not the absence of fear, Kalen. It is the courage to ask the right questions before drawing swords." He had clung to those words through years of diplomatic training, through tense negotiations where even a dragon's gaze could feel like a challenge. And now, standing at the threshold of the most delicate moment of his life, he understood the gravity of what she had built. And what could collapse in an instant? The ceremonial musicians began their haunting chant, a combination of human harmonic resonance and subtle dragon vocalizations, tuned to reach both species in frequencies that conveyed solemnity rather than intimidation. The sound rolled across the cliffs, echoing off the floating structures and reverberating over the ocean. It was designed to unify rather than divide, yet Kalen could feel it prickle the nerves of those around him. Every leader present, human or dragon, was acutely aware that even a single misinterpreted note could be taken as a signal for aggression. Lyra's coffin hovered in the center, its surface etched with both human and dragon symbols, the marks of decades-long negotiations etched into the metal and stone. She had insisted on this hybrid design, a final testament to her belief that cooperation was possible even in death. Kalen's eyes traced the carvings, imagining the years of painstaking effort to earn every inch of compromise they represented. Every line, every symbol, every mark told a story of patience, courage, and the terrifying cost of failure. A breeze swept across the platform, carrying the tang of salt and ozone from the distant magnetic storms. Kalen shivered despite his thick cloak, sensing the tension that coiled like a living thing in the space around him. Elder Irinder's eyes narrowed. The dragons were whispering among themselves in low tones that humans could barely register, a language that carried subtleties of history, warning, and curiosity. The younger dragons shifted, wings flexing nervously, the smallest gestures magnified by their immense size. Kalen looked again toward the cliffs. Beyond the assembled dragons, he could see the storm clouds gathering on the horizon, not yet violent, but charged with a latent energy. It reminded him uncomfortably of the first time he had seen a dragon roar in the wild, massive wings slicing the sky, the air itself trembling with the sound, and humans scrambling to maintain composure. Fear was a currency in these negotiations, and today, more than ever, it would be tested. The human leaders began their ritual march, moving in coordinated steps toward the central platform. Kalen followed, careful to keep his pace measured, mindful of both the eyes of dragons and humans upon him. Every movement mattered. Every glance, every gesture, could be scrutinized as a signal of intent. His heart beat faster, not from grief alone, but from the awareness that one wrong interpretation could ignite centuries of accumulated tension. Kalen reached the platform's edge, standing near the coffin. He glanced up at the sky, feeling the auroras shimmer with unnatural intensity above them. It was beautiful, terrifying, and fragile all at once. Around him, the assembly fell silent. Every dragon held its breath, every human stiffened, and the ocean below seemed to pause. In that perfect, suspended moment, Kalen felt the invisible weight of history pressing down upon them. He knew that what happened in the next moments could define the future of two species, and he could do nothing but wait, poised between fear, hope, and the memory of Lyra's guiding voice. A shadow flickered across the cliffs beyond the gathering, massive and fluid, cutting through the auroral glow. Kalen's breath caught. Every instinct screamed that something monumental had arrived, something that would ripple across the fragile piece in a way no one could ignore. The shadow grew, the air itself trembling, and Kalen's grip tightened on the ceremonial railing. He did not know yet whether it was omen, tribute, or threat, but he knew without a doubt that the funeral, intended as a place of mourning, was about to become a crucible. The coffin hovered above the central platform, its anti-gravity field pulsing faintly as if breathing alongside the assembly. Humans formed a precise semicircle around it, their movements synchronized with the low hum of ceremonial drones that kept the platform steady against the ocean's restless sway. The wind carried the scent of salt and ozone, tangling with the faint metallic tang of the coffin itself. Kalen Voss stepped closer, careful not to crowd the other humans, yet eager to see every detail. The carvings etched into the coffin's surface gleamed under the pale sunlight, a tapestry of human and dragon symbols intertwined, peace treaties, joint ventures, diplomatic seals, and commemorations of battles fought and reconciled. Each mark spoke of painstaking compromise, of the fragile harmony that Lyra had nurtured through decades of negotiation. Elder Irinder's gaze swept over the coffin, sharp and unyielding. He tilted his head, studying the symbols with meticulous attention. To dragons, every line conveyed emotion and intent. The younger dragons shuffled uneasily behind him, restless, their wings twitching in subtle displays of tension. Kalen noted their movements, aware that any misstep in human behavior could be misinterpreted as provocation. The very air seemed charged, the auroras above pulsing faintly in response, painting the sky with streaks of green and violet that mirrored the unease below. The musicians began again, their chant a delicate fusion of human harmonics and dragon undertones. The sound rolled across the cliffs and over the ocean, carrying a resonance that vibrated in both human chests and dragon bones. Kalen closed his eyes for a moment, letting the rhythm guide him, grounding him in the solemnity of the moment. Around him, humans whispered quiet prayers, some closing their eyes, some bowing heads, while dragons remained statuesque, their long lives having taught them that grief could be expressed without words. Yet the tension among the younger dragons betrayed their uncertainty. Kalen's thoughts drifted to Lyra. She had been a force unlike any other, a human who understood dragons not as beasts to be tamed but as partners, as allies in shaping a shared destiny. He had trained under her guidance, learning to balance empathy with strategy, diplomacy with courage. And now, standing at the edge of her final ceremony, he felt the weight of responsibility pressing down upon him. He was acutely aware that the future of the fragile interstellar truce could hinge on a single misread gesture, a single faltered step, or an ill-timed word. A sudden flutter of wings above drew Kalen's attention. He tilted his head, scanning the cliffs where Irinder's counselors perched. Nothing appeared out of place, no movement beyond the expected shifts of restless dragons, but the air had changed. It carried a pulse, subtle yet unmistakable, that made his skin tingle. The auroras above seemed to intensify, rippling in response to something unseen. Kalen's stomach tightened with anticipation. The human assembly had reached the point of ceremonial alignment. Every leader was in position, every aide attentive, and every drone humming in synchronized orbit. The coffin pulsed slightly, an almost imperceptible shift in its anti-gravity field that mirrored the collective heartbeat of the assembly. The platform quivered underfoot, subtle vibrations that Kalen recognized as not mechanical but emotional, an echo of the energy radiating from the gathering, amplified by the coffin's resonant design. A distant roar vibrated through the air, low at first, almost a murmur, then growing, carrying a depth and weight that set the ocean trembling beneath them. The human assembly froze, eyes darting to the horizon. The auroras flickered violently, streaking the sky with green and violet arcs that seemed to coil and twist in the wind. Dragons stiffened, heads raised, wings spreading slightly in response to the sound. Irinder's eyes narrowed, scanning the distant horizon with precision honed over centuries. The young dragons stirred, the tension palpable in their muscles, in the subtle flare of nostrils and the twitching of tails. Kalen felt his heart leap into his throat. The sound was immense, carrying not just power but intent, grief, challenge, memory, warning. He had heard stories of such roars, but never in person. Never with this weight, this resonance, this proximity. Humans around him instinctively stepped back, some moving hands toward communication devices, others gripping ceremonial weapons beneath their robes. The air was thick with fear and anticipation, every mind racing to interpret the signal. The coffin pulsed again, its anti-gravity field flickering as if responding to the roar. The floating platform beneath it shivered, forcing Kalen to adjust his stance. He noticed Ambassador Selena Corvain's lips pressing into a thin line, eyes scanning for signs of movement beyond the horizon, her mind already calculating threats, preparing contingencies. Kalen's gaze met hers briefly, and he saw the tension, the readiness to assume aggression, and the underlying terror of losing control. Then the shadow appeared. Massive, fluid, cutting through the auroras with wings that seemed to span the length of the platform below. Every dragon shifted, recognizing the presence before they could name it. Irinder's copper scales glinted as he craned his neck, every sense alert. The humans stared in awe and dread, some dropping to one knee, some frozen in disbelief. The wind whipped violently, carrying the scent of ozone, fire, and something ancient, elemental, uncontainable. Kalen's breath caught. He realized instantly who it was. Therix, the Skybreaker, one of the greatest dragon warlords of the age, a creature of immense power and authority, had arrived. The mere presence of such a being made the ocean below boil, the cliffs tremble, and the hearts of all gathered humans race. Yet Kalen felt an unexpected stir of hope amid the fear. If Therix had come here, at Lyra's funeral, perhaps there was meaning beyond aggression. Perhaps there was reason to listen, to ask, to understand. The shadow descended closer, massive claws brushing against the air, scales reflecting the fractured light. The young dragons cowered slightly, some hissing under their breaths, others pressing against older kin. Humans instinctively stepped back, some drawing the ceremonial energy weapons that had never been intended for use today. The auroras above responded to Therix's presence, streaking and arcing with energy that seemed almost sentient, a mirror of the tension below. Kalen adjusted his grip on the ceremonial railing. He felt every eye in the assembly turn toward him, humans fearful, dragons wary, the air charged with expectation. The funeral had become a crucible, and the first spark had arrived not from human error, but from the roar and shadow of a dragon who defied prediction. He knew that the next moments would define whether peace would endure or shatter entirely. And he understood, with a clarity that made his chest tighten, that he would have to act. Therix descended from the sky with a presence that seemed to draw the very air into his orbit. The wind whipped violently around the floating platform, tearing at cloaks and rattling the anti-gravity anchors that held Lyra's coffin aloft. The younger dragons pressed themselves against the cliffs, wings spread instinctively, some hissing softly while others stamped claws against stone in nervous tension. Irinder remained rigid, eyes narrowing into slits, measuring every feathered movement of the air, every pulse of energy radiating from the newcomer. Kalen Voss felt his stomach tighten, the familiar hum of fear and anticipation coursing through him. He clenched his hands around the railing of the ceremonial platform, fingers whitening, and adjusted his stance against the gusting winds. Around him, human delegates shifted uneasily, whispers cutting through the musical chant like knives. Selena Corvain's jaw was a tight line, her eyes never left the approaching dragon. Some aides had fingers hovering over comm links, ready to summon orbital defense units at a moment's notice. The slightest misstep could trigger a catastrophic response, and Kalen knew it. Therix's wings flexed, each movement precise, powerful, yet strangely controlled. The auroras above responded, coiling and splitting as if acknowledging the dragon's dominance over the air itself. His scales reflected the fractured sunlight, silver and blue streaked with veins of molten red that shimmered like living metal. Every heartbeat of the assembly seemed to synchronize with his approach, the ocean rippling in unison beneath the floating platforms, the distant cliffs vibrating with a deep, primal resonance. Kalen could feel it in his chest, a tremor that was not entirely physical, a pull of energy that seemed both threatening and mournful. The coffin pulsed faintly, anti-gravity fields quivering as if sensing the magnitude of the arrival. Kalen's mind raced, tracing every possible reaction, every potential outcome. He remembered Lyra's words, "Courage is the bridge between fear and understanding." His gaze met hers, though she was long gone, and he forced himself to step forward slightly, placing himself between the human delegates and the gathering storm of a dragon who could obliterate the platform with a single swipe. The wind rose higher, carrying the roar that had already echoed once across the cliffs. This time it came from Therix himself, a sound that rolled over the assembly like a tidal wave. The auroras above snapped and cracked, the light refracting violently through the charged particles in the air. Waves below erupted in bioluminescent spumes as the ocean itself seemed to respond to the sonic assault. The floating platform quivered, the anti-gravity anchors straining against the force, and the coffin rocked slightly, a small but terrifying movement. Humans froze in panic. Some dropped to their knees instinctively, some pressed hands to ears, while others gripped ceremonial weapons, fingers trembling. Selena barked orders under her breath, trying to impose structure on chaos, but the sheer magnitude of the roar rendered protocol almost meaningless. The sound was both fury and sorrow, a resonance that conveyed grief as powerfully as threat, and no human mind could immediately parse its intent. The younger dragons hissed and flared wings, tails lashing against stone, claws digging for purchase. Irinder's stance remained firm, but his eyes reflected recognition. This was no random outburst, no simple display of strength. Therix's roar carried meaning, deliberate and layered. The older dragon seemed to communicate, in the language of muscle and scale, the full depth of emotion behind the sound, rage tempered by sorrow, respect intertwined with memory. The air itself vibrated with the intensity of his presence, and every creature within sight felt the weight of centuries pressed into a single instant. Kalen's heart pounded. The wind tore at his hair, the salt and ozone stinging his eyes, yet he could hear something beneath the roar, a cadence almost human in its longing, almost dragon in its clarity. He realized that the sound was not merely an attack, it was a declaration, but of grief, of reverence. His mind raced. Every instinct screamed to retreat, yet another voice, quieter but stronger, urged him forward. He had to know. He had to act. The coffin trembled again, almost tipping on its platform, as if sensing the powerful emotions being unleashed above it. Kalen's gaze shifted briefly to Selena, to see her eyes wide with fear, hands tightening on the ceremonial rail. He glimpsed the aides, panic-stricken, ready to press buttons that could end worlds in seconds. And then he looked to the cliffs, where younger dragons huddled in confusion, wings half spread, unsure whether to fight, flee, or bow. Therix's wings beat again, sending gusts that knocked over ceremonial instruments, banners snapping violently against their poles. His head tilted slightly, jaw opening once more, and a second roar exploded from him, sharper, resonant, splitting the air. The auroras fractured with jagged streaks, lightning dancing along the charged skies. The floating platform shuddered violently, and Kalen stumbled, gripping the railing to steady himself. For a moment, he could not breathe, could not think, could only feel the raw force of the dragon's presence pressing against every fiber of his being. And then, almost imperceptibly, the roar shifted. Beneath the terror, beneath the force, there was a tone of mourning, of memory, of something personal, intimate, ancient. Kalen's mind caught it, heart hammering. He realized, in that instant, that this was no challenge to humanity, no threat of war in this moment. It was a tribute, a signal of grief so immense that it shook the sky. Yet the humans around him could not see the subtlety, and the dragons around him held their silence, waiting to see how the humans would react. Kalen inhaled deeply, feeling the wind tear across him, the vibrations of the platform underfoot, the aura of centuries in the presence of a living legend. He knew what he had to do. While the assembly froze in fear, while weapons hovered at the ready and younger dragons quivered in uncertainty, Kalen stepped forward, small against the enormity of the dragon before him. He raised his hand slightly, an unspoken gesture of calm and attention, and prepared to speak the one question that could bridge centuries of fear and misunderstanding: "Why are you here?" Kalen's legs trembled slightly as he stepped onto the trembling edge of the platform. The roar had subsided into a low, resonant hum, but the vibrations lingered in the air, rattling bones and teeth, leaving a palpable tension that seemed to thrum through every human and dragon present. His gaze lifted to Therix, who hovered above the cliffs, wings partially folded yet still vast enough to blot out the fractured sunlight. Every scale, every sinew, every movement radiated raw power, and yet there was a weight behind the dragon's eyes that spoke of grief, of loss, of memory. Kalen inhaled deeply, forcing his racing heart to slow, and took the next step forward. "Why are you here?" Kalen called, voice steady despite the tremor of adrenaline in his chest. The words felt small, fragile, almost laughable against the enormity of the dragon before him. Around him, the assembly froze. Humans clutched weapons, some pressing them to ceremonial holsters, while eyes widened in fear and anticipation. Dragons stiffened, heads tilting, tails flicking nervously, as if the very air had become electric with the possibility of either war or revelation. Irinder's gaze bore into Kalen, sharp and questioning, but he remained still, silent, waiting. Therix's head tilted slowly, nostrils flaring as he regarded the human who dared step forward. His eyes, silver with streaks of molten red, seemed to peer not at Kalen's face, but directly into his mind. The platform shivered beneath Kalen's feet as if reacting to the dragon's immense psychic presence, and he steadied himself by gripping the railing. Therix exhaled slowly, a low rumble that vibrated through the air and carried the scent of ancient forests, volcanic stone, and wind-worn peaks. The dragon's voice, when it came, was a deep resonance that seemed to echo inside the chest, not the ears. "I am here for Lyra," Therix rumbled. The words were simple, yet the weight behind them made them feel like a decree, a statement of history, and a confession all at once. Kalen felt the vibrations in his chest, sensed the sorrow behind them, understood that this was no declaration of war. Around him, humans stiffened, unsure whether to interpret this as threat or tribute. Some of the younger dragons hissed softly, confused by the subtlety of emotion conveyed in such a fearsome presence. Kalen swallowed, lifting his gaze higher, meeting the ancient eyes of the dragon that had once walked battlefields with legends of old. "Lyra trusted you," he said, voice rising slightly to carry over the lingering wind and hum. "She believed in peace between our people. Your arrival, your roar, was it grief? Or warning?" He kept his hands visible, fingers splayed in an unspoken gesture of calm and inquiry. Around him, tension crackled, the fragile line between fear and understanding stretching thinner with every heartbeat. Therix lowered his massive head slightly, and Kalen could feel the warmth of its breath, scented of sulfur and ozone, washing over him. The dragon's eyes softened imperceptibly, and a shiver of recognition passed through the assembly. Humans unconsciously relaxed shoulders, dragons ceased their hissing, and the auroras above seemed to pulse gently rather than convulse violently. The coffin hovered steadily now, a faint glow emanating from its carvings, as if Lyra herself approved of the unfolding moment. Lyra understood the weight of history, Therix continued, voice resonant yet carrying the tremor of emotion. She understood that fear often speaks louder than reason. My roar was not challenge. My roar was, farewell. A tribute to one who bridged the impossible. Kaelin's mind raced. The dragon was speaking, not in threats, but in respect, in mourning, in the language of history that humans often misread. Around them, every human present held their breath, some dropping weapons slowly, eyes widening in dawning comprehension. Kaelin stepped closer, lifting a hand in acknowledgement, careful not to appear threatening. She believed in dialogue, he said softly, letting the words float across the wind. She believed that understanding could prevent the war you've always feared. You've come, to honor her, not to declare war. His voice, though small compared to Therix's presence, carried an authority born of empathy and courage, of someone willing to step into the void where others trembled. Therix's head dipped further, a gesture that in dragon terms was equivalent to a bow. The younger dragons murmured among themselves, adjusting wings, tails flicking less nervously. The older dragons maintained measured poise, but the tension in their shoulders eased slightly. Kaelin felt the ocean beneath the floating platforms settle, the waves softening, bioluminescent creatures surfacing briefly in quiet tribute. Even the auroras above seemed to shimmer with gentler hues, the jagged streaks smoothing into flowing arcs of light. Selena Corvain remained rigid for a moment, eyes locked on the interaction, then exhaled slowly, lowering her hands. Her jaw remained tight, but the edge of fear softened. The aides followed suit, some letting weapons rest, others lowering their communication devices, acknowledging that the situation had shifted from immediate threat to tense revelation. Kaelin felt the weight of the moment. He had stepped forward, asked the question, and the entire assembly had pivoted with him, teetering on the knife edge between misunderstanding and comprehension. Therix exhaled again, slow and deliberate, as if unburdening centuries of memory. Lyra's passing is not only my loss. It is a reminder that peace must be actively maintained. That which she built must endure. Kaelin's chest tightened with understanding. The dragon's presence, the roar, the arrival, they were not a challenge, not a threat, but a charge, a reminder that history demanded courage to preserve what was fragile. Kaelin nodded slightly. Then we will honor her. We will preserve what she built. And we will learn, from you, from this moment, how to carry it forward. His words were small but steady, a bridge between species, a lifeline to understanding. Around him, tension eased further. Dragons relaxed, wings folding neatly against their sides, tails curling instead of lashing, eyes softening. Humans lowered their heads in quiet respect, feeling for the first time in years that the line between fear and comprehension had thinned. The wind died down gradually, leaving a calm charged with the weight of shared understanding. The coffin hovered steadily above the platform, auroras flowed gently overhead, and the ocean rippled with quiet luminescence. Kaelin remained at the edge of the platform, heart still hammering, knowing that a single question had shifted the course of the funeral, the fragile truce, and perhaps the fate of two species. Therix regarded him silently, massive head bowed in quiet acknowledgement, and for the first time, Kaelin felt the impossible weight of history feel like hope. The wind settled but the air remained thick with tension, as if the very space between humans and dragons were holding its breath. Kaelin Voss remained at the edge of the floating platform, chest heaving slightly, his gaze fixed on Therix, whose massive wings now folded against his body in measured calm. Around them, the younger dragons were still uneasy, flicking tails and shifting claws nervously, though the worst of their fear had ebbed. Irinder remained rigid, eyes sharp, calculating the implications of the dragon warlord's presence and words. Even as understanding had begun to flicker, the memory of the roars, the crack in the sky, the trembling of the platform, lingered in every human chest. Ambassador Selena Corvain exhaled, her voice low but sharp. Hold positions. Do not relax your guard. She gestured to aides, some of whom were still adjusting devices, ready to summon orbital defense units or energy shields at a moment's notice. Her fingers hovered just above the console that controlled planetary-level defenses. Even now, she could not entirely trust that Therix's tribute was genuine. Trust had been forged and broken in cycles stretching back centuries. Kalen's quiet words had shifted the moment, yes, but the reality of interstellar diplomacy was that a single misstep could erase centuries of careful negotiation. Therix rumbled again, low and deliberate, and the vibrations traveled through the platform, through the ocean below, and into the bones of the humans who had braced themselves. The sound was no longer a roar, but a measured hum, a resonance of presence that seemed to communicate thought and feeling without words. Kalen realized he could feel the dragon's intent now, not aggression, not immediate threat, but observation. Therix's gaze swept over the humans, lingering briefly on Selena, then drifting to Kalen, who held the warlord's scrutiny with a mixture of awe and steadiness. The younger dragons, emboldened by Therix's calm, began murmuring among themselves, their voices low and respectful. It was a language humans could barely perceive, a complex tapestry of tone, vibration, and subtle movement. Kalen strained to interpret, recognizing snippets of warning, reassurance, and curiosity woven together. Even the elders of the Dragon Council watched carefully, cautious not to misinterpret the signals that Therix sent with every tilt of his head, every flick of a wingtip. Selena's voice broke the tense silence again. "Report," she said, crisp and authoritative, though the tight line of her jaw betrayed the remnants of fear. One aide stepped forward, voice low. "The Eastern Fleet is on alert. Defensive arrays are at 50% readiness. Energy shields are online. No units have been armed, awaiting further orders." She nodded once, sharply, then turned her gaze back to Therix. The human assembly remained rigid, shoulders squared, eyes alert, ready for the slightest sign that the tribute had turned into aggression. Kalen's thoughts raced. This was the moment he had feared, when understanding might falter, when fear would override reason, when centuries of fragile truce could collapse at the hint of misinterpretation. He stepped slightly closer to the center of the platform, hands visible, fingers splayed in gestures of peace. "We do not seek conflict today," he said, voice carrying over the wind, steady. Lyra's vision was a bridge. "We can honor it, or we can falter under fear. The choice is ours." Around him, the platform seemed to pulse faintly, as if resonating with the intention behind his words. Therix's eyes shifted toward him, and Kalen felt the intensity of the dragon's scrutiny. The warlord's head dipped slightly, acknowledging the statement, yet his wings twitched, restless, as if attuned to every micro-expression of the humans present. Kalen recognized the subtle communication. Therix was weighing not only the humans' intent but their capacity for restraint, their ability to respond to grief without resorting to violence. The dragon's presence was a mirror of centuries-long history, a test as much as a mourning ritual. A whisper ran through the younger dragons as Therix exhaled, sending currents of air that rustled banners and lifted loose objects. The floating platforms shivered in response, though the anti-gravity anchors held firm. Kalen could feel the psychic tension, subtle yet palpable, the pressure of history pressing on every assembled individual. Irinder's gaze never left Therix, sharp, calculating. The elder dragon's mind was working, weighing potential interpretations, evaluating risks, calculating what human and dragon actions could follow the warlord's presence. Selena finally lowered her shoulders, though her eyes never left Therix. "We will continue the ceremony," she said, voice steady but tight. Her words were a signal to her aides, a controlled acknowledgement that while fear remained, aggression would be withheld unless provoked. Kalen felt a flicker of relief, though he knew the tension was far from dissipated. The younger humans still glanced nervously at one another, and a few fingers twitched over weapons or consoles, reminders that fear had not entirely receded. Kalen exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle slightly. He understood that the funeral had transformed. It was no longer a simple mourning, it had become a delicate negotiation of emotion and intention, a crucible testing whether grief could coexist with understanding. Every gaze, every movement, every whispered breath among dragons and humans carried meaning. The very air seemed charged with the collective awareness that one wrong step could unravel decades of careful diplomacy. Theryx shifted, folding wings further, lowering massive claws onto a nearby cliff edge. The vibrations carried through the rocks, a subtle but undeniable reminder of power. The ocean beneath the platforms rippled in acknowledgement, waves glowing faintly with bioluminescent pulses. Even as calm returned, the underlying tension lingered. Kalen knew that while immediate war had been averted, the assembly's nerves were taut. The funeral was now both a memorial and a test of restraint, courage, and the capacity for empathy across species. Kalen's eyes met Theryx's again, and he nodded slightly, silently affirming the bridge between them. Theryx's gaze softened imperceptibly, a silent acknowledgement that the human before him had understood, however tenuously, the language of dragons in grief. Around them, the younger dragons mirrored the gesture in small ways, tails curling, wings folding, a subtle release of tension. Humans followed suit, some lowering heads, some taking careful breaths, the readiness for instant conflict tempered by understanding. The coffin hovered steadily above the platform, anti-gravity fields pulsating faintly, a heartbeat echoing through the assembly. Kalen exhaled once more, feeling a tentative hope. The moment had passed without disaster, yet he knew that vigilance must remain. Trust was fragile, history heavy, and the potential for misunderstanding ever present. Still, in that charged calm, Kalen glimpsed the possibility that grief and respect, even across species, could guide action, and that Lyra's vision might endure, not through fear, but through courage, empathy, and careful choice. Kalen remained near the center of the platform, his gaze shifting between Theryx and the human assembly. The wind had calmed, but the tension still lingered, a taut thread connecting every heart present. He could feel it in the vibrations of the floating platform beneath him, in the subtle flicker of auroras above, and in the restless movements of the younger dragons. Every eye, human or dragon, watched him, as though waiting for a signal, a choice, a single word that could determine whether peace would hold or shatter. He raised a hand slightly, an unspoken gesture of calm, and took a careful step forward. "We are gathered here to honor Lyra," he said, voice carrying steadily across the platform. She believed in dialogue, in understanding, in the possibility of reconciliation. "Let us not allow fear to dictate our actions today." His words hung in the charged air, and for a moment, the assembly remained still, processing the intent behind them. Theryx shifted slightly, wings flexing, claws gripping the cliff edge with a subtle pressure that sent vibrations through the platform. His eyes, molten streaks of silver and red, fixed on Kalen, evaluating, questioning, as if weighing whether the young human could sustain the courage required to bridge two species. Kalen felt the scrutiny but did not waver. He knew that inaction or hesitation could be interpreted as weakness, and weakness in front of dragons was dangerous. The younger dragons murmured softly among themselves, wings flicking in cautious acknowledgement of the human's attempt to communicate. Irinder's gaze remained fixed, calculating, measuring the flow of conversation, the subtle shifts in energy, the underlying motives of both humans and dragons. Kalen understood that he was being tested not only by Theryx but by the history embodied in the assembly, a living reflection of past conflicts, treaties, betrayals, and victories. He turned slightly to face the human assembly. "Ambassador Corvain," he said, careful to keep his voice respectful but firm, "we must recognize what has just occurred. Theryx's presence here is not a threat. It is grief, it is tribute. Our task is not to react in fear, but to respond with understanding." Selena's eyes narrowed, and Kalen could see the muscles in her jaw tighten. She had built her life on anticipating threats and preemptively neutralizing them. Convincing her that restraint was appropriate would require every ounce of diplomacy he possessed. "Understanding does not mean naivety," Selena replied, her tone controlled but edged with caution. "We maintain our defenses. We remain vigilant. That is not fear, it is prudence." Kalen inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her point without concession. "Prudence, yes. But let our vigilance not be guided by assumption. Let it be guided by knowledge, observation, and dialogue. From above, Ferrix exhaled slowly, a vibration that moved through the cliffs and ocean alike, subtle yet undeniable. The sound carried a tone of assent, a recognition that Kalen was speaking with intention and awareness. The younger dragons relaxed slightly, wings folding closer, tails curling in less defensive positions. Even Irinder's posture softened fractionally, though his eyes remained sharp. The balance of power was delicate, and Kalen felt the weight of it pressing against every step he took. He turned his attention back to the coffin, hovering steadily above the platform. Its anti-gravity fields pulsed faintly, synchronized with the emotional resonance of the gathering. Kalen reached toward it slightly, hands open in a gesture of shared respect, and spoke softly, as much to himself as to the assembly. Lyra built this bridge. We are the ones who must cross it, carrying her vision forward. The words, simple and earnest, seemed to ripple through the crowd, settling some of the lingering tension. Ferrix lowered his head, massive eyes meeting Kalen's, and the dragon's gaze held a weight that transcended species, age, and history. It was not merely recognition, it was acknowledgement. The subtle hum in the air shifted, and Kalen felt the tension in the younger dragons ease further. Their wings flexed less nervously, tails curled in small gestures of tentative trust, and even the elder counselors, long accustomed to reading the currents of human emotion, seemed to sense a thread of possibility. Kalen's words had opened a narrow channel of dialogue, fragile but present. He began to speak directly to both assemblies. Let us remember why we are here. Lyra sought peace, understanding, and the ability to communicate beyond fear. Today, we can choose to honor that vision. We can speak, listen, and observe, rather than react in terror or aggression. His voice carried across the platform, clear and unwavering, and the wind seemed to pause in acknowledgement. The human delegates shifted slightly, some lowering weapons completely, some relaxing shoulders, while the aides still hovered near consoles, ready but restrained. Selena's gaze flicked toward Kalen, a mixture of skepticism and cautious respect in her eyes. She recognized that he was doing what she could not, bridging the gap between raw human caution and the unspoken language of dragons. Ferrix's wings flexed again, lifting slightly as if to punctuate his presence, yet no threat was implied. The auroras above pulsed gently in response, and the ocean beneath the platforms rippled, bioluminescent light flashing softly like a heartbeat. The assembly remained tense, but the sharp edge of immediate fear had dulled. Kalen realized that this fragile calm was the first step toward dialogue, the first real chance to carry Lyra's vision forward into a world where misunderstanding so easily became violence. He exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing against him, yet buoyed by the subtle shifts around him. The funeral had become more than a memorial, it had become a proving ground for courage, empathy, and the delicate art of interspecies diplomacy. Kalen knew that the moments ahead would demand careful observation, thoughtful speech, and unwavering composure. The bridge was there, narrow and precarious, but it had been built. And now, for the first time in generations, both humans and dragons were stepping onto it, testing whether the fragile thread of understanding could hold. Kalen took a deep breath and stepped closer to the center of the platform, the weight of every gaze pressing down on him. He could feel the subtle vibrations from Ferrix's presence even from this distance, a steady pulse that seemed to synchronize with the very structure of the floating platform. The coffin hovered silently above the water, its carvings gleaming faintly under the sun, a silent witness to the dialogue unfolding. Kalen knew that every word, every gesture, every micro-expression could tip the balance between understanding and chaos. He squared his shoulders and lifted his voice, steady but carrying the weight of courage that Lyra had always demanded. Ferrix, he said, eyes meeting the dragon's molten silver gaze, you have come across the stars to be here. You have roared, and the sound has shaken the sky itself. I do not understand all of your history, all of your grief, but I am here to listen. Tell me, why you mourn. The words felt small against the dragon's enormity, yet Kalen sensed a thread of connection, fragile and trembling, that could reach across the gulf of fear and centuries of conflict. Therix's head tilted, nostrils flaring slightly, sending a wave of warm, ozone-scented air across the platform. The vibration of his massive presence hummed in Kalen's chest, a deep resonance that conveyed both curiosity and an almost imperceptible caution. Around them, the younger dragons shifted slightly, tails flicking in measured movements, wings folding closer to their bodies, waiting. Even Irinder's rigid posture softened fractionally, though his eyes remained sharp, cataloging every nuance of this unprecedented interaction. Kalen's gaze swept briefly to the human assembly. Ambassador Selena Corvain's jaw was tight, her eyes sharp, yet the edge of tension in her shoulders had softened. The aides hovered near communication devices, fingers ready but restrained, sensing that the next exchange could define the day. The humans were held captive not by fear alone, but by the possibility that understanding, rare and precarious, might emerge here. A low rumble issued from Therix's throat, rolling through the cliffs and ocean below. The vibration carried more than sound, it carried memory, weight, and sorrow. Kalen felt it reverberate through him, a sensation that was almost physical, as if the dragon's grief were pressing against his chest. The auroras above shimmered, responding to the resonance, casting flowing arcs of light across the floating platforms. The younger dragons murmured softly, their voices a complex weave of curiosity and cautious restraint, interpreting the human's courage and the dragon's response. Finally, Therix spoke, his voice deep and resonant, filling the space without effort. Lyra was not merely human. She carried the understanding of centuries, of battles fought and reconciled, of promises broken and rebuilt. She bridged a world that many thought could never be united. My roar was not anger. It was acknowledgement. It was memory. It was mourning. The words were simple, but the depth behind them pressed against the platform like the weight of a storm. Kalen felt the truth of them in every vibration of the air. He nodded slowly, feeling the gravity of the moment settle into his chest. I understand, he said softly, letting the words flow across the wind. She trusted you. She trusted all of us to carry her vision forward, to honor her work. Your grief, it is a tribute, not a threat. Around them, humans began to relax slightly, the rigid tension of fear giving way to the tentative opening of comprehension. The younger dragons flicked tails and folded wings more completely, recognizing that the intent had shifted from aggression to respect. Kalen stepped forward another pace, careful to keep hands visible and gestures non-threatening. We cannot replace Lyra, he said, voice rising slightly to carry across the platform. But we can learn from her. We can listen to each other, even when fear tempts us to act first. You came here to mourn, to honor. Let us allow that to be enough. Let it guide us instead of fear. He felt the platform beneath his feet pulse in response, subtle yet unmistakable, as if acknowledging the collective weight of the assembly's shared attention. Therix exhaled slowly, a long, measured breath that rippled through the cliffs and water. You speak boldly, human, he said, eyes locking on Kalen. Many would cower. Few would ask. The dragon's gaze softened slightly, the molten streaks in his eyes reflecting the auroral light above. Around them, tension eased, though not entirely, the younger dragons relaxed further, wings folding neatly, claws releasing small grips on rock. The humans mirrored the shift subtly, shoulders dropping, fingers leaving weapons, though the edge of vigilance remained. Kalen felt the fragile connection solidify just enough to hold the moment. Courage is the bridge, he said quietly, recalling Lyra's words. Between grief and understanding. Between species. Between fear and choice. His words hung in the air, echoing softly across cliffs, platforms, and ocean. The coffin hovered steadily, anti-gravity fields pulsing gently as if in quiet acknowledgement of the dialogue unfolding. Therix lowered his massive head slightly, a gesture of both recognition and respect. The younger dragons mirrored it in miniature, and even Irinder's eyes softened fractionally, though the elder dragon remained vigilant, aware that history's weight was heavy and the future fragile. Kalen felt the air shift, the auroras above pulsing gently rather than violently, the ocean rippling with bioluminescent light as if reflecting the first glimmers of understanding. The human assembly exhaled, collectively sensing the subtle shift, the easing of fear without loss of vigilance. Selena's hands remained near her controls, but her posture suggested acknowledgement of the importance of what was unfolding. Kalen's own chest felt lighter, though the enormity of responsibility pressed steadily. He knew that this was only a beginning, that dialogue would need careful cultivation, observation, and courage, but in this moment, a thread of connection had been established, fragile yet undeniable. Therix's eyes held Kalen's a moment longer, then the dragon exhaled, sending a final, gentle vibration through the platform and cliffs. "Your courage honors her memory," Therix said, voice low, reverberating. "Do not squander it." Kalen nodded, understanding the weight of the command and the promise contained within it. The bridge had been crossed, even if only a few steps had been taken. The path ahead remained narrow, perilous, and untested, but it existed, and for the first time since the funeral began, hope threaded through the assembly's tension, fragile but real. The wind finally stilled, leaving a tense calm that stretched across the floating platform and cliffs. Kalen stood near the center, hands still raised slightly, not in defense but in a gesture of steady presence. Therix lowered his massive head completely, resting it briefly near the cliff edge, wings folded neatly, eyes still fixed on the young human who had dared to ask the question. The auroras above flowed smoothly now, streaks of green and violet moving in graceful arcs instead of violent fractures, reflecting the subtle easing of tension below. Around them, the human assembly exhaled collectively, the rigid fear that had held their bodies stiff loosening slightly. Selena Corvain's jaw remained tight, but her posture relaxed fractionally. Fingers that had hovered over comlinks and weapon holsters withdrew, though her eyes remained watchful. Kalen sensed the lingering caution but also felt the first true acknowledgement that the immediate threat had passed. The younger humans shifted uneasily, some lowering heads, some glancing at one another, processing that the dragon's presence was an act of tribute rather than aggression. The younger dragons mirrored the change subtly. Wings flexed, claws relaxed, tails uncurling in slow, measured movements. Irinder's sharp eyes followed every subtle signal, scanning both humans and dragons, cataloging shifts in posture, pulse, and gaze. He seemed to allow a faint exhalation through nostrils, the closest thing a dragon could show to relief. The subtle vibrations of Therix's presence persisted, but they had shifted from warning to observation, carrying instead the weight of mourning and respect. Kalen stepped closer to the coffin, hands reaching out but not touching, palms open in quiet reverence. "Lyra built a bridge between us," he said softly, voice carrying just enough for the nearest humans and dragons to hear. "She believed that even in moments of fear, we could choose understanding. Today, we are choosing that, together." The floating platform pulsed faintly underfoot, a resonance that Kalen felt as a heartbeat, as if the assembly itself acknowledged the intention behind his words. Therix lifted his head slightly, eyes sweeping over the coffin, the floating platforms, the humans gathered below. His gaze lingered on the carvings etched into Lyra's final resting place. Symbols of treaties, alliances, battles reconciled, and victories shared. His massive form seemed to soften, the tense energy radiating outward diminished, replaced by the quiet weight of memory and respect. Kalen realized that the dragon's grief was not just for Lyra, but for what she represented, a possibility that had always been fragile, always under threat, yet enduring through courage and vision. Selena exhaled slowly, shoulders dropping a fraction, though she remained cautious. "Keep the formation," she said, voice low. "Do not interpret calm for compliance. We remain prepared." Kalen nodded, acknowledging the balance she had to maintain, while knowing that the fear that gripped her was natural, reasonable even. Diplomacy and vigilance often had to coexist, especially when the stakes were this high. The younger dragons shifted again, murmuring softly, communicating in a low resonance that Kalen could feel more than hear. It was a language of subtle signals, curiosity, and acknowledgement. The ocean below rippled in response to the settled tension, waves glowing faintly with bioluminescent pulses, as if the world itself recognized the fragile accord taking shape. Kalen felt a profound weight settle on his shoulders, the awareness that this moment, the first understanding across fear, was a turning point, fragile yet undeniable. He glanced at Therix once more. The dragon's eyes held centuries of memory and power, but in them now was a trace of peace, a measure of trust placed in the human who had dared to speak. "You honor her," Kalen said softly, voice carrying across the calm wind. "Your grief, your presence, it teaches us as much as any treaty or council ever could." Therix's gaze met his, and the subtle nod of his massive head felt like an unspoken agreement, a recognition that the young human had grasped the meaning of his arrival. The coffin hovered steadily, anti-gravity fields pulsing faintly, and Kalen felt the energy settle into a rhythm, a heartbeat in tune with the assembly's cautious composure. The auroras above rippled gently, light reflecting in the eyes of both humans and dragons, as if blessing the fragile understanding that had been achieved. Around them, the younger dragons flexed wings, shifted stances, and murmured low tones, while humans lowered heads, some pressing palms together in silent homage to both Lyra and the dragon who had come to honor her. Kalen exhaled fully, feeling the tension release slowly through the platform, the cliffs, and the ocean below. He knew the day was far from over, dialogue would have to continue, mistrust would linger, and vigilance would remain necessary. But in this quiet moment, the funeral had begun to fulfill its purpose. It was not merely a ritual of mourning, it was a testament to courage, empathy, and the ability to step into fear and choose understanding. Therix exhaled once more, the sound low and deliberate, carrying no threat, only the weight of centuries of memory and the acknowledgement of human courage. The younger dragons echoed the subtle cadence, a chorus of restraint and tentative respect. Kalen felt the enormity of what had transpired, a bridge had been crossed, the first steps taken across a span that could easily have collapsed. And though the future remained uncertain, though mistrust in history would not vanish overnight, for the first time in decades, hope threaded through the assembly, fragile, luminous, and real. Kalen stepped forward once more, the wind now calm around the floating platform, the auroras above flowing like liquid silk in gentle arcs. The coffin hovered steadily, anti-gravity fields humming faintly, as if echoing the pulse of the assembly below. Therix rested nearby, massive wings folded, eyes scanning every human with measured attention, weighing intentions, gauging responses. Kalen inhaled slowly, feeling the gravity of the moment settle in his chest, and raised a hand in a gesture that invited both humans and dragons to focus. "We have witnessed grief," Kalen said, voice carrying evenly across the platform. "We have witnessed power restrained by memory and respect. But now we must speak, not in fear, not in caution alone, but in understanding." He let the words settle, observing reactions. The younger humans adjusted posture, some taking small steps forward, while dragons shifted subtly, wings flexing, tails curling in cautious engagement. Even Irinder's eyes flicked briefly to the humans, a silent acknowledgement that dialogue could proceed, but vigilance must remain. Selena Corvain exhaled through her nose, lips tight. "Speak carefully," she murmured, though loud enough for Kalen to hear. "We are not here to bow blindly. We are here to observe. To respond. To survive." Kalen nodded, silently agreeing. He understood her caution, diplomacy required patience and respect for history as much as for emotion. He turned back to Therix. "Your grief has spoken louder than any words," Kalen said. "Now let us hear from each other, openly, so that Lyra's vision may endure. Let us test our courage against understanding, not fear." The dragon's eyes narrowed slightly, a thoughtful crease forming in the scales around his brow. Therix's presence alone shifted the tension of the assembly, yet Kalen felt an opportunity, fragile but tangible, to encourage exchange. A younger dragon stepped slightly forward, wings flicking, tail curling in measured movements. Low tones issued from its throat, subtle vibrations that Kalen felt through the platform. He could sense curiosity and cautious inquiry, questions about human intent, about the nature of tribute, about whether Lyra's vision could survive the scrutiny of centuries-old suspicion. Kalen adjusted his stance, recognizing the unspoken dialogue and willing himself to maintain calm, deliberate, and empathetic presence. He glanced at the human assembly. "Listen carefully," he said, voice steady. "The dragons before you are not here to attack. They are not here to demand submission. They are here because they honor Lyra, and because they exist in a world where fear is as potent as any weapon. We must respond not with weapons raised but with understanding offered. Speak truthfully, but with respect." Selena's eyes flicked toward him, wary yet attentive. "And if words fail?" she asked softly. Kalen met her gaze, unwavering. "Then we begin again. With patience. With observation. With courage. One step at a time." The aide's tension eased slightly, though still held by decades of training in survival and diplomacy. Theryx shifted, claws pressing into the cliff edge, sending subtle vibrations through the platform. His wings flexed slightly, and he exhaled a low, steady vibration that rippled across the assembly. The younger dragons emitted soft, harmonic murmurs in response, tail tips flicking, wings folding and unfolding slowly. It was a language of curiosity and tentative engagement, and Kalen understood that the first step of conversation had begun without a single human word spoken. He raised his hands slightly, palms open to both humans and dragons. "I ask you to listen, to respond with clarity, and to honor what Lyra built. Fear will always test us, but courage allows us to respond with reason, even when the stakes are measured in centuries of mistrust." Around him, humans inhaled collectively, some nodding subtly, while dragons shifted posture, mirroring small gestures of acknowledgement. Irinder's eyes remained sharp, but the corners lifted slightly, the faintest sign of approval from an elder wary of human unpredictability. A human counselor stepped forward tentatively, voice low but clear. We recognize your grief, Theryx," the delegate said, voice steady. "We recognize your presence as a tribute, not a challenge. We honor Lyra's work, and we seek understanding, not conflict." The words were careful, measured, but they carried weight, bridging the gulf that had seemed insurmountable just hours ago. The dragon's gaze swept over the human assembly, lingering on the speaker, then returning to Kalen. Theryx exhaled, a subtle vibration that shifted through the cliffs, ocean, and platform. It was neither roar nor threat, but acknowledgement, recognition of words offered in courage. The younger dragons emitted soft harmonic murmurs, tails flicking slowly in restrained approval. Even the auroras above seemed to shimmer in agreement, flowing arcs of light tracing the subtle energy of engagement rather than aggression. Kalen felt the moment expand, the fragile bridge stretching between species, threading centuries of history through the courage of those willing to speak truth, to respond with intent, and to observe without immediate judgment. "This is only the beginning," Kalen said, voice carrying steadily. "The funeral will continue, but let today also be a testament that understanding, even between the most unlikely allies, is possible. Let us honor Lyra not only in mourning, but in action." The floating platform pulsed faintly, the coffin steady above, and the ocean below rippled with bioluminescent light, reflecting the fragile, tentative progress of dialogue. Both humans and dragons adjusted posture, subtle movement signaling awareness of shared responsibility. Kalen exhaled slowly, feeling the tension ease, just slightly, as courage began to balance fear in the hearts of those gathered. The first true steps of conversation had been taken, fragile, careful, and powerful in their potential. Kalen stood near the center of the platform, the wind finally gentle, carrying only the faint scent of salt and ozone. The coffin hovered steadily above the ocean, its anti-gravity field glowing faintly, a heartbeat echoing through the floating platform. Around him, humans and dragons alike moved cautiously but deliberately, as if testing the fragile peace that had settled over the assembly. The auroras above shimmered softly, reflecting the tentative understanding that had begun to bridge centuries of fear. Theryx lowered his massive head fully to the cliff edge, claws pressing lightly into the stone, wings folded tightly, eyes still locked on Kalen. The elder dragon's posture exuded calm authority, yet there was an undercurrent of vigilance that reminded everyone of the power restrained only by intention. The younger dragons mirrored his composure, tails curled, wings folded, murmuring low harmonic tones that resonated through the platform. Irinder's gaze swept over the humans, measuring responses, acknowledging the subtle progress while remaining watchful for any sign of misstep. Selena Corvain adjusted her stance, shoulders still tense but slightly relaxed. Her hands rested near controls, though she made no move to touch them. Kalen glanced at her, seeing a mixture of caution and respect, understanding the delicate balance she maintained between vigilance and hope. He lifted his hands slightly, a gesture to signal calm, to show that while vigilance was necessary, fear need not dictate action. He stepped closer to the hovering coffin, voice steady, carrying across the platform and cliffs. Lyra built this bridge not for ceremony alone, Kalen said. She built it for understanding, for courage, and for the choice to see beyond fear. Today, we honor her not only in mourning, but in action. The words rippled across the assembly, and he saw subtle responses. A human counselor nodded slowly, younger dragons flexed wings in acknowledgement, and Therix's gaze softened imperceptibly. Therix exhaled, sending a low, measured vibration through the cliffs and platform. The sound was neither roar nor threat, it was acknowledgement, a weight of memory and intent that pressed upon the assembly without fear. The younger dragons mirrored the cadence with harmonic murmurs, tails flicking in restrained approval. Kalen felt the resonance in his chest, the tangible weight of centuries of history and power aligning with the fragile hope that had taken root in this moment. Kalen lowered his hands and spoke quietly, deliberately, to both humans and dragons. We have witnessed grief, strength, and courage today. Let us allow these lessons to guide us. Let this moment be a testament that understanding is stronger than fear, that dialogue can endure where weapons might destroy. Lyra believed it. Let us prove her right. The floating platform pulsed faintly beneath him, as if echoing the intention of his words. From the human assembly, one of the younger aides stepped forward, voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. We accept your presence, Therix, and the tribute you have paid. We honor Lyra's work and pledge to continue her mission. Around them, other humans nodded, some lowering weapons fully, others adjusting posture to show respect and attentiveness. Selena's eyes met Kalen's briefly, a flicker of approval crossing her features, the faintest acknowledgement that he had guided the assembly well. Therix's eyes swept over the humans, then returned to Kalen. Your courage reflects hers, the dragon rumbled, voice deep and resonant. Few would step forward. Fewer still would speak with understanding rather than fear. Today, I honor both Lyra and your actions, human. The younger dragons echoed the tones softly, tails curling, wings folding neatly, eyes reflecting acknowledgement rather than suspicion. Even Irinder's stance relaxed fractionally, shoulders dropping slightly, the elder dragon's expression carrying a subtle, reluctant approval. Kalen exhaled slowly, feeling the tension ease, though vigilance remained, tempered now by comprehension. He glanced around at the assembly, both humans and dragons, seeing faces that had been etched with fear and uncertainty now softened, tentative, yet open. He knew the path ahead would remain narrow and treacherous, that mistrust would linger, and that the lessons of history would not be easily forgotten. Yet in this moment, he saw that the first true step had been taken. He spoke again, voice quiet but firm. Let the funeral continue in peace. Let this ceremony mark not only mourning, but understanding. Let it be the foundation for dialogue, respect, and courage that can endure beyond this day. The coffin hovered steadily, the anti-gravity field pulsing with subtle warmth. The auroras above flowed gently, painting the sky with arcs of green, violet, and silver, a living symbol of fragile accord. Therix exhaled one final time, a vibration that resonated across cliffs, platform, and ocean, soft yet powerful, a benediction of respect and acknowledgement. Kalen felt the subtle shift, the easing of centuries of tension, the silent promise that Lyra's vision might endure. The younger dragons murmured their approval, wings flexing gracefully, tails curling in measured confidence. Humans lowered heads, some pressing palms together in quiet homage, others simply standing still, absorbing the weight of the moment. Kalen turned his gaze to the horizon, the sunlight glinting off the ocean, the auroras shimmering above, reflecting both fear conquered and hope ignited. The platform beneath him pulsed gently with the rhythm of the gathering, a heartbeat shared across species. He knew this was not the end of challenges, not the end of mistrust, but it was the first true affirmation that courage, dialogue, and understanding could endure. Therix dipped his massive head slightly, a gesture of final acknowledgement, before rising slightly, wings flexing once as if to signal departure or observation, but no threat was implied. The younger dragons followed, some stepping closer to the humans, some remaining near Therix, tails and wings relaxed. Kalen felt the fragile bridge between them, narrow yet stable, shimmering with potential. The funeral continued, but a new layer had been woven into its purpose. It was no longer only mourning, but a testament to courage and empathy, a demonstration that fear could be met with understanding, that history could guide but not dictate action. Kalen stood, silent yet present, feeling the weight of responsibility and the promise of possibility. For the first time, humans and dragons stood not merely in proximity, but in shared acknowledgement, a fragile accord reflecting the enduring vision of Lyra, whose legacy had transformed grief into hope. The wind carried softly, the auroras shimmered, and the ocean rippled with quiet luminescence. Across species, across centuries of mistrust and conflict, the first true steps toward lasting understanding had been taken, and Kalen allowed himself a moment of quiet hope, knowing the future had begun to shift, fragile, luminous, and real.